You're listening to the Wild Paw Dog Podcast with Karen Wilde and Jon Buscall, episode 16. The bandwidth for this podcast has been sponsored by 2 Pure Pet Fresh for a cleaner and fresher home, recommended by pet behaviour specialists. Well, hello Karen, how are you doing this morning?
We're getting blown about over here. I don't know what the weather's like there, but it's been really windy. I'm taking my little tiny dogs out. In the morning is like, kite flying contest.
Yeah,
because it's just so windy and it's flat around here, so you really notice it. But it's it's definitely a hood up or hat on type weather. But it's not cold. It's very odd weather. We've had it for a few days now. But if anyone's listening and you've had like your fences blown down and things like that, I do sympathise. I'm sorry, because it's just such horrible weather. But I hope the dogs are enjoying it. And I would say something as well. If you're noticing changes in your dog during the windy weather, don't be surprised, because it does whirl them about a bit, and it also brings up all those smells and things and sort of chucks them all over the place. So if they get sort of more lively, then don't be surprised. I actually had a conversation with a primary school teacher, and she said exactly the same. She said, windy day playtimes are always really, really, they come in really hyped up. So if you're seeing that in your dog, don't panic. It will pass.
So what are we going to be talking about on the show today, Karen?
Well, we've got a couple of things, really. We had a reader question, which was a very good topic that I wanted to discuss anyway, well, it's about dogs at the window and how they might react. And certainly if neighbours are complaining about your dog for various reasons. So we're going to tackle that and the kind of habit forming process that can happen when dogs are just in a house normally. I also wanted to look at helping handling skill, because a lot of my owners really could help themselves a huge amount by just improving how they handle their dog when they're out and about. And it's something that is generally neglected. I'm actually writing something about it, hopefully will be published soon. But the idea is, you can help yourself a lot without having to train the dog, with actually training yourself. So we're going to do some sort of bullet points about that later on.
Okay, and is that something that's going to be published on your website? Published
on the website and hopefully in book form as well.
Oh, exciting stuff. Listen, Karen, I thought we'd start this week with a bark or two.
We've been sent a bark.
We've
Hooray!
been sent a bark. I love this. This was sent in by Natalie, or Nats, Bubbly Nats, I think as she's known on Twitter. And yes. I thought that was hilarious. So here's Bubbly Nats and her dog Mika.
Mika, say good girl. Say hello. Say hello, Karen. Hello, Jon. Good girl.
Oh, I thought that was brilliant. That was really cool.
Mika.
Go Mika.
Do you remember that? We want more of these, because we asked a few weeks ago on a podcast about, we had the dog barking, and one of our listeners wrote in and said that it was making their dog bark. And we asked everyone to, to send in their dog bark. So Mika's kind of, set the ball rolling and hopefully not chase the ball, Mika. And, so we want more, because I love that. If you can teach your dog to bark, and we talked about barking the other day, it is an issue for lots of reasons. Teach your dog to bark on command, and then you can teach them to be quiet. So send us your dog barks in, little sound file. If you're not quite sure how to do it, send me a quick tweet on Twitter or an email, and I'll help you. But we really want these kind of guest appearances, because it's lovely, and we love having Mika. I think we should have Mika again another time too, because she's just got such a cute bark. She's a big girl. She's a big dog. She's a German Shepherd, and she just is beautiful. And I've seen photos of her, and she's lovely. So yay, and thank you, Nats, for sending that in.
Yeah, that's brilliant. If you'd like to send us a bark, you can send a bark to podcast@karenwild.co.uk.
Yep, or you can contact me on Twitter as Wildpaw, as you know, which we keep saying.
All right, Karen, why don't we get into the first segment of the show today? You wanted to say something about dogs at the window.
Yeah, I mean, I do quite often get calls from people that their neighbours are complaining and saying the dog's barking all day. Or they have a persistent problem with the dog, at the window, generally kind of watching everything that's going by and causing an upset. And it can be a noise nuisance, but it can be generally not very good for the dog. We had a reader question from Jordan who contacted me on Twitter, and what he wanted advice on was how to stop his dog barking when people are walking past the house. Now, as I say, this can cause all sorts of other problems. Neighbours will complain if your dog is barking a lot. They could be barking in the garden, or they could be barking in the house. I know we dealt with why your dog's barking a few weeks ago, but let's look at the specifics of the problem, because it is a huge issue and it's so easily prevented. So, the thing is, if your dog is at the window, let's assume, let's picture the scenario, shall we? So you've got, if you live in a sort of normal place where people go by and you get leaflets to the door and people come and deliver things, you may be there, you may not be there. On the whole, most people are out at work. So you've got no control over what goes on. If you've got a dog that is able to have access to that window and they're going to see things going by, then they're maybe going to react. Not every dog will react, but most dogs will at least have a kind of, what's that, won't they?
Yeah.
It depends where you live, but usually if you've got a problem like this, it's because you've kind of allowed that to happen. So, quite often the dog will either think, what is it? Who's that? Who are you? Or they might even think, yikes, oh my goodness.
You said there that you have allowed it to happen. That's quite interesting. What do you mean by that, Karen?
Well, if you've got to understand with a dog, obviously, that they are going to have, they've got the day to themselves and they're trying to amuse themselves. And, they might just find a comfy spot and like to see what's going on in the world because they've not got a lot else to do. And that's a perfectly normal thing for them to do. What you're doing as an owner is you're allowing them to do that. So you don't necessarily have to leave them with access to that place. But if you do, then there is a responsibility factor involved. Let's face it, most of the time, if someone's prosecuted for a noise nuisance by their neighbour, or they have a neighbour complaint of some sort, the person is owning the dog. The dog isn't responsible for, yes, they are, but in the eyes of the law and in certainly, in terms of civil law, you are responsible because it's your dog. So you are giving the dog access to that area. So what's happening? What's happening is, and if it's anything like our house, you get charity collection bags delivered, you get leaflets for pizza delivery, you get, all kinds of stuff come through the door, newspapers and this sort of thing throughout the day. And they're all different times and they're fairly random, You also have the postman, and that's a huge issue. So, any posties listening, we feel your pain. I know what it's like because you have this habit that builds up in the dog. So, unless you run, I don't know, a business where people are coming in, or a doctor's clinic or something like that, most people approaching the house will be delivering something, and usually you don't have to be there. They'll come, they might ring the doorbell, they might not, but they'll put something through the letterbox and then they go away again. In the dog's eyes, somebody's coming. So it's, an alert. So maybe they might say, I can hear little noises.
That's your
lot. Get an email. No,
I did.
Mine.
And then your doggy's in the background. I heard a yap.
Oh, is that Pickles?
Yeah, that was Pickles. Hello, Pickles.
Yeah, he's doing exactly what I don't want him to do, which is bark at the window.
Well, then here we are talking about barking.
It's my responsibility. He does do that, given the opportunity, and at the moment I want him out of the way. So
but this is an interesting issue, Karen, because I think what you're saying here, this is about the way that we restrict dogs in terms of access to say, for example, the front of the house, or...
Yeah, absolutely. And it may not be a problem, and sometimes it may be the only room. So we need to look at that. But first of all, let's look at why does it develop into this, real problem? And like I say, the people aren't coming in, they're going away again. So it teaches the dog a very clear message, which is, person comes to the house, the dog may think, what's that? They might think, oh my goodness, I'm frightened, what is it? And they will bark because they'll react. They will react either to want to chase the thing, because some dogs are very into that kind of thing, or they might think, just what is it? But the ultimate response from the person who comes to deliver is what? What is it? They go away again. So it's pretty obvious. Person appears, dog barks, person goes away, dog thinks, that was a successful strategy. I barked and they went away. Now, like I say, there's lots of elements to this, but it could be that your dog likes chasing, in which case you'll see it in other parts of their daily life. You'll see they like to chase perhaps rabbits or birds. They might chase planes in the sky or try to. Those kinds of things you'll see. So you'll know maybe it's a chase behaviour. If it's a fear behaviour, it could be, as opposed to predatory, which is what I would count the chase behaviour as, partly. If it's a fear behaviour, it could be an alert bark, but it also could be that they're chasing the thing away. So it might be that they're fearful and chasing the thing away. So there's lots of elements to consider first. Is my dog actually a bit worried? Is it this? Is it that? But then you've got to think about how successful their behaviour is to them. Highly successful behaviour. So it is self-reinforcing.
Yeah.
The more habit they have, the more opportunity they have. Say, here I counted the other day, I had 6 people come to the door for various things. I work from home. So when I'm here, I know what's coming. And when I get in, if I've been out on an appointment, I can see how many leaflets I've got. So this is how much repetition the dog is getting.
Right.
So 5 or 6 goes a day. If you were training your dog 5 or 6 times a day to do something, your dog would be pretty good, wouldn't they, by now?
I mean, one of the things I have, because I suppose my house is situated about 20 meters back from the road. It's a very, very quiet area here. But the dog room is at the front of the house. So anytime someone walks by, well, it's not always actually, but there are certain dogs, they really will bark and make it's not a bark because they're bassets, it's a howl. Ooh. And
baying.
Yeah, exactly. And we don't actually get people come to the door here. People coming to visit, but we have our post box is on the front of the road. Everyone here in Sweden has a mailbox on the front street, so that's a long way from the house. Right. And no one has letter boxes in Sweden, so that's quite good. But I have talked to some people that come by the house with their own dogs and say, who pass the house and will say, oh yes, my dog's scared because, you've got these big bassets who occasionally howl. And I must admit, of course, you're right there, Karen. I am reinforcing that because I let them be in the front room or in the dog room at the front of the house. And
that's right. And it depends how much of a problem it is. But the other thing is, your neighbour, the people walking by, they've identified something, which is that if one dog or several dogs are agitated, then another dog will pick up on that. It may be that the dog isn't scared. It might be that they're just thinking, what are you barking at? What are you looking at? But it's not a very nice thing for another dog to walk by with. And you do find, I've got a lot of clients where they'll walk down the road and they'll say, oh, he always does this here because they've got a dog that barks at them, as it comes by. So it's equally leaving them at a gate will do the same thing.
Yeah.
And probably, cut down another barrier, because a gate is quite easy to, they can usually see through it, can't they? So this is a self-reinforcing habit, which means it can be quite tricky to control unless you do certain things. Now, there are other things that could make it a lot worse as well. Firstly, passers-by on the street. So it doesn't necessarily mean, like you've said, that they're coming to the door. They may well not be, but they might just be walking by. But again, a dog will see somebody walking up one side of the road and coming nearer and nearer the house, and then they bark, and the person carries on walking. All that person's doing is walking down the road. But the dog's thinking they were coming here and now they've gone away, and I can see their back, and their back's, disappearing, retreating. The other thing, and this is a problem with a lot of owners that are at home, is that they are the ones that reinforce the problem as well, because what they're saying is, shut up, stop, be quiet, don't bark. And that sounds,
woof,
it certainly
woof.
sounds like it's the dog. Yeah, whoa, 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 like that. So they are reinforcing what they're hearing from the dog. And then the dog's thinking, well, you're agitated, you're upset, I'm agitated and I'm upset, therefore I'm justified in doing what I'm doing. Or they're thinking, oh my goodness, you're really cross. Every time somebody appears, you're going to get cross. So I'm going to try and chase that person away faster than ever. So it's a pretty powerful habit. Let's look at what can we do to stop it.
Yeah, that's what I
should
wanna
you
know.
stop it? The question is, should you stop it? Well, we've said about neighbour noise nuisance. It can be a big problem. I did have a client a year ago that had, the neighbour had taken them, had complained to the council. They were ready to press charges because the dog was barking all day. And it turned out that the dog had never really done it before. It turned out that there were works going on at the back of the house and the dog was in that normal room. So simply by moving the dog to another room and doing other things that were important to do with its behaviour, to do with reassuring the dog, that kind of thing. But actually just moving it was a really quite simple thing to do. An environmental change, it's a hassle because you have to rearrange your house a little bit, but
Sure.
you can do that. So you could do that. That's a great way of doing it. But what you've got to remember as well is, if the dog is stressed, you're going to need to deal with the stress. If the dog is bored, you're going to need to deal with that, because some dogs it will become, quite a happy thing to do. And it's a lift, isn't it? Even if they don't actually like it, it's an adrenaline rush. It's something to do. So let's look at, how to stop it in that way. If you want to give the dog something else to do, first of all, make sure they're really tired before you go out. No matter how tempted you are to skip their walk before you go out, do it, because you will end up with a tired dog, and a sleeping dog is not going to be much of a problem. They won't chew, they won't bark, because they'll be conked out, assuming that the problem is that and not a separation issue, which we talked about the other week. So there are loads and loads and loads of games you can give them to do as well. Really good, solid chew toys work very well if you've got that kind of a dog, or a puzzle toy like a treat ball, or my favourite thing at the moment, which is called a tug-a-jug, which is a really strong, clear plastic item. It looks a bit like a bottle. It's it's something like bulletproof plastic. It's very easy to clean. You can put their food in there. You can put their breakfast in there. You don't have to feed them in a bowl. So make them work for it. Gives them half an hour going away at that. The dog will conk out afterwards and be fast asleep. So really, if anyone comes, the dogs can't be bothered. If there's a noise nuisance and you can't control it, you need to put the dog somewhere where obviously the sounds are blocked out. And if you can't do anything else but move your settee away from the window so they can't leap upon the back of it, or at the worst, draw the curtains. Again, if you've got to be careful if the dog has a separation issue. You do have to be very careful on that, because if they've got a separation issue, you're going to have to deal with that on the side of this, because it's not good enough just to block access. But blocking access for a dog that chases and likes movement would work reasonably well, and give them other things to use those instincts for. Give them chase games elsewhere, tire them out, give them a nice hunting game to do, like I said, and you will have a dog that, like I say, just really can't be bothered.
I think one of the things that concerns me slightly here, Karen, is that fat dogs, overweight dogs is an issue. It is. And I do think one of the things that I see with people that have dogs, they go out and they give their dog is it a Kong? One of these, they stuff a Kong full of goodies, and it's like, they feed they walk and activate the dog, they give it breakfast, and now they're going out. So bang, they give them a big Kong filled with lots of treats. And I think you have to be aware that you are increasing the dog's calorie intake. So I thought the thing you said there about giving the breakfast or giving food, in some kind of activity, that's a great way. How do you feel about that, Karen?
Yeah, that's something that everyone, whenever I recommend something like that, it's usually a dog that's quite food oriented anyway, and the dog's usually a little bit overweight. So the first thing I think when I see a dog that's slightly overweight is I always question how much exercise they're getting for their needs, but then they might well be getting plenty of exercise. So then I look at how many treats is this dog having? What is it having? And I'm not a fan of bought treats. I'm not a fan of them. I think that they are very high calorie. They're hugely processed. I'm not a nutritionist, but I look at it and think, it's like giving your kid a Mars bar when you leave them in, while you nip to the post office. I just think, well, yeah, it's really nice, but it's not necessarily the best thing for them. You can do other things to keep your dog interested with the food. My biggest and favourite tip is if they're not that bothered about their kibble, if that's what they're fed. I mean, raw food's slightly different, but if they're having a dry food kibble, as I know the majority of our listeners' dogs are, dry food kibble, they get it all the time. You quite often leave it in the bowl for them to help themselves. So it's very low value. It's boring. So you put that in a treat toy, they'll think, well, I'm not bothered to get that out because they'll get it anyway. So how do you make it a little bit more interesting? So my tip is get the kibble, measure it out for the day, get a tiny bit of chicken or a tiny bit of something that's quite tasty. And depending on your preference for your dog, you could use a little tiny bit of hot dog chopped up or something like that. Mix it around and leave it for a bit. And then take out the bits you don't really want your dog to eat and save those for treats later on, because then you've got a kind of spiced up, flavoured kibble. And I use that as a way of enticing the dog into they thinking, well, I can smell sausage. Where is it? Oh, it's kind of on the kibble. But you're not giving them the actual food because it's there. So
that's a nice one, Karen. It's like, yes, there is the sausage here, but
you're talking about a dog that has an extremely good sense of smell.
Sure.
I mean, they're not idiots, but if they're hungry and it's a little bit nicer than what they've had in the bowl, and you're not actually upping their calorie intake,
no.
Then you can save the bits of treat for actual training if you want to, or doing other things while you're out on a walk. So it's very important that you don't overfeed them, and try and give them treats that are tasty, long lasting, but preferably not edible. So Kong is a good idea as long as you put in a scrape of something, or put something in and freeze it. So it takes ages for the dog to get it.
Yeah, freezing is a really good idea. And I think what we could say is, if you've got any tips about the kind of treats that really activate your dog during the day, send us a tweet on twitter.com at wildpaw /wildpaw. I think that would be good, or email us. But Karen, I just wanted to ask you, I mean, I know feeding bones is a very real bones is a very contentious issue, and some people feed bones, no problem. They believe in, the raw diet, and their dogs had bones forever, no problem. I'm very wary about giving. I mean, I would say to someone, don't give your dog a bone if you're going out for the day. I think if you do feed bones to your dog, you always do so in a supervised setting. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert. I don't feed my dogs a raw food diet. It's like one of those debates that people get very, 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 very into, and certainly not something that I would want to talk about here. But I do know enough vets and enough vet nurses that are, well used to the emergency surgery of dealing with a dog with perforated interior, where these bones have gone through. So it may be a small percentage, I don't know. In my personal opinion, I don't think I would want my dog to have anything that might cause a blockage, or that might be sharp. So if that includes a raw bone, then that includes a raw bone in my book. But it's not necessarily, it's a personal choice for you and for your animal. You may never have any problems at all. If I do use any sort of bone at all, the only sort that I recommend, because I find that Kong toys, whilst they're sort of fairly durable, a lot of people will turn around and tell me no, they're not, but there are versions of the Kong toy that are extremely durable. They smell of rubber, and they are non-porous, which means they don't hold the scent for very long. So for my dogs, I also give them hollow, sterilised bones, which are pure white, like a very thick walled bone with the marrow taken out. So they've got a channel right through the middle that you can put tiny bit of meat paste in there, or a tiny bit of cheese spread, or low fat cheese spread, and it takes the dog a long time to get those out. But I always warn my clients that whilst they're, a couple of pounds each, they're not expensive, and you don't get the smoked ones or cooked ones because they do break up really easily. These don't break up very easily. They last a long time, but always have them under supervision if you can, and if you can't, be aware that there might be a risk. But they don't splinter.
Marrow bones.
So they're kind of a cheap version. You can buy them hollow, and they are pure sterilised. They're not fresh. The other reason I would warn against giving your dog a fresh bone, and this is again purely from a behaviourist point of view, where I've seen cases where dogs have had a problem, is that they are so incredibly delicious for the dog that the dog will get quite guarding over them, even to you. Will be like, no, this is the best Christmas treat I've ever had in my whole life. Now go away. So I in my opinion, I probably wouldn't do that. And I would be aware of all the pitfalls, rather, if you do choose to do that. But really what you want to make sure is that whatever you leave your dog with, that it's something safe and okay. And that doesn't include, raggers or those sorts of things. Because if you've got a dog that chews, and it chews up a ragger, it's not going to know the difference between a ragger and a cushion tassel or a curtain, or, so do be careful what you leave your dog with while you're trying to give them this activation thing as well.
Okay, Karen, is there anything else that we need to talk about in terms of, your dog's barking when you...
Well, the window thing. Now, this is a bit of a warning for everybody. Often if I see a dog that is, when you say people aggression, people think that it's a dog that's leaping up and attacking people. Not quite like that. Dogs that rush out of the door and bite. And this is where we come to, our posty friends, who I'm sure it happens to quite a bit, where the dog has been allowed to bark at the window, bark at the door, bark at the window, bark at the door. And one day the door rather might open, which means that they're rushing and chasing, and they'll rush straight out the door and chase whoever happens to be the other side. Or A, they might chase into the street, but B, they might grab hold of the nearest person who happens to be on the other side of the door, because they're so wound up.
Yeah.
And you have to be very careful, because even the nicest, most normal, bog standard, if you'll excuse the expression, pet dog is perfectly capable of rushing out and sort of with their mouth open, because they've had a lot of practice at chasing away. And so all of a sudden there's somebody standing there that isn't running away. So they'll think, well, I'll make you go away then. And of course, in an effort to reinforce that message, the go away message that the dog has learned to do, the visitor gets a bite on the ankle. Ooh. So do be really, really careful what you're allowing your dog to do. And I strongly recommend don't allow it. How do you not allow it? Block the access, teach them a very, very good recall all around the house, and be prepared to sit there with them on a lead or a house line, so that when you say, come here, instead of shut up, you're saying it in a nice voice. The dog has to come back. You give them something nice and pop them in another room in the house to settle down. So you're not reinforcing this habit.
Karen, I was thinking, for example, my neighbours, just a couple of houses up, they have 2 Chihuahuas, Nelly and Bella, and they are known in the area as the most yappy, aggressive dogs. In fact, because they're right on the corner, and everyone that goes by, I mean, it's quite a big garden. They have it's actually very big, and Bella and Nelly have the whole run of this garden, and they have a fence, and they come bounding over, and anyone who walks past, whether it's a dog or a human being, yap, 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 all the way down. Now, when I go past there with my woofs, they actually just sort of stand there and look at them as if to say, what's going on here? They don't really do anything. And sometimes I think, should I stand there? Because I know that I'm reinforcing their behavior. If we come to the top and then they yap, 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 and we walk past, we leave because they follow us all the way down right to the very end, and then we carry on. We are reinforcing it effectively. Should I stand there with my dogs and let them bark themselves in?
Your neighbour might not like that very much, but there's a whole thing about, if you go away, that reinforces the behaviour. If you stand there while they're barking and then leave when they've stopped, that's good logic. And I do, there is a whole sort of sphere of training where that is used as the main reinforcement, is that the person will only, the threat as such, will only go away when the dog is displaying an alternative behaviour to the aggressive one. And I'm actually going on a 2-day course on that in a few months' time, and I'll report on that when I get back. I think the logic is sound. I think it probably would be okay, but what you've got to remember is if it's just you doing it, there's no interaction from anyone else, and no one else is helping, it might just be so incredibly stressful for those 2 dogs to have somebody there all the time, standing there and then going away when they calm down. It might work, but it might cause them a lot of anxiety in the middle. Sure. When I would do it, if I was doing something like that, I would look at the threshold that the dog that's reacting is at. So if they're at the threshold where what you'd ideally want to do is not let them bark in the first place, not let them get themselves all wound up and then go away, so they don't go through that whole anxiety phase. That is a more ethical way to deal with it. And again, I'll go through that whole idea when I've been back from the course, because it's a very, very interesting idea. But yes, I think logically, yes, that probably would be right. I would worry about what your neighbour thought, and it might wind the dogs up so much for a long time that it might not be the nicest thing to do. I don't know. I
can see that actually, because the owners get very stressed by this. I mean, obviously it's very embarrassing and difficult for them to have these 2 yappy dogs. And last summer they were using these lemon sprays, the collars. Oh. I can just see your jaw hitting the floor. There were these 2 small Chihuahuas with these huge collars that every time
I was going to say, is it not dragging them down to the ground? They're so big, those things.
How do you feel about those?
I think I would say that if those dogs are barking because they're anxious, so that every time they see someone they go, oh my gosh, we must chase them away, and they're not very happy about it, and then they get a squirt in the face or under the chin of like a compressed air lemon smell, which is actually bitter, it's not very nice for them, then I think that would probably serve to increase their anxiety. I think that would probably make things worse. It might switch off the barking, it might not, but the problem is that the anxiety will increase. So you've ended up with a dog that was anxious before and now is incredibly anxious, because not only are they seeing something they don't like outside the fence, but also they're getting something under their chin that is sort of horrible as well. So if ever I've used a device like that, which is very, very rare, it has to be very specific usage. And my advice looking at a case like that, and obviously I'd have to sit down and go through lots and lots of other things. The first thing I would try and establish is, do they have to have free access like that? Is that something that, is that something they actually enjoy? Because if it isn't something they enjoy, then I would take steps to give them a nicer life, because it might be they feel they have to defend their property. That's quite a stressful existence for them. So that would be my angle,
Okay, well, I think it's time we moved on, Karen.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about handling and how much I end up teaching handlers rather than dogs, because I find that once the handler, or the owner, I should say, because to me, an owner is a handler. As long as they've got their hands on a dog, they're a handler. So that's my definition. It doesn't mean, police dog handler or RAF dog handler. It's somebody who's actually in control of the dog at that point. If you know how to react, usually, depending on the dog, but usually if they're okay with you handling them, if they're familiar with you, you can make your life a huge amount easier by knowing how to do certain things when you're out and about with your dog. There are so many little tips that I find owners, because we're human beings, we all seem to do the same things. We all react in similar ways. We do certain things with our bodies when something happens, and the dog takes that signal as something other than what we're trying to convey. So my top tips on how to help yourself when you're out and about handling your dog. The first one, and the biggest one, which I'm constantly saying, is stand up straight. Stand up straight. Stand up straight. Ooh, stand up straight. It's something I think I'll just put it on auto replay.
Not bend down, looking down at the ground.
Over your dog. If you bend over your dog when you're trying to do something, when you're walking along, obviously most people stand up straight, but, if you are trying to get your dog to understand something, what we tend to do as human beings is we try and get into the dog's sort of eye line. The way we end up doing that is bending at the waist. You bend at the waist so the dog sees. If you imagine, the dog's lower down usually. Well, they're usually lower down than you. Heaven help you if your dog's taller than you while they're standing on all 4 feet. But if that's more like a pony or a horse. If you bend over towards the dog, what the dog is seeing is a big looming action from you. If it's to do with wanting the dog to come closer to you and you bend over it, most dogs will back away because you're coming towards them with your sort of upper body. So they will back away, which defeats what you're trying to get them to do. So if you're bending over and you want the dog to come right to your feet so you can perhaps, put their lead back on or something like that, don't bend forwards, because you're pushing the dog away and the dog will try and keep in your eye line. So as your head moves towards them, they will move back trying to see your face. Better crouch down. Bend your knees, crouch down, squat. If that's not comfortable, try and get the dog to come into your side so that you're not tempted to bend forward. On a sunny day, don't stand with your back to the sun so that the dog sees a big silhouette shadow. Often, again, I'll see dogs looking, thinking, I can't really see what you're doing, because they can't see your facial features. The same goes for inside. If you're training in the kitchen and you've got, a strip of lights across the top and you're bending over the dog, the light's behind you. So, because the dog's looking up at the ceiling because he's looking up at you, can't necessarily see what it needs to see. So if the dog's looking a little bit, what we might read to be stubborn, I would say potentially confused, try and crouch down so the dog can see your face, or stand away from the light so that the dog can see the light shining into your face so that they can see what you're actually trying to communicate. That applies to almost everything you're trying to do when you're teaching your dog. Have you ever thought about that, John? Has it ever occurred to you? Because obviously with Bassets, they're all pretty low down, aren't they?
They're super low down. I don't find that I have such a bad back, I don't bend down over them. I sort of go down on my, I bend my knees and go down. With the 3 pups that I've got at home, it's very difficult because one of them in particular really hasn't got not jumping up yet. So if I bend down, he headbutts me. So,
yeah, it's not comfortable. That's the other thing, of course. If you bend forwards, think about a dog doing a play bow. A play bow, their front end goes down and their back end sticks up in the air and their tail's thrashing about happily. I was always told, I don't know if this is the case, or I was always told, you actually look quite inviting. So you're more likely to have a dog bounce up towards you because you're bending forwards in a kind of play manner. So again, if you really want a dog to listen, stand up with your back straight. and tell them what to do. They can read your body language while you're walking around. Like I say, you don't walk around bent over. And this even applies with a small dog. Small dogs will learn to stand a little bit further away and look up and see what you're doing. But help them because it will help communicate. So if you're finding that suddenly they're not doing something that you think, well, they know how to do it, what a naughty dog, it could well be that you're bending over them. The next one, which kind of follows on from this, from day one, teach your dog to enjoy having its collar held and reached out for and taken. Please try not to reach out and grab your dog at any point. You may have to in an emergency, and I understand that. But the rest of the time, hands come forward to give, hands come forward to do nice things. Try to never, ever have your hand come forward and do something nasty. A, you might cause the dog to snap at you. And B, you'll do what you see most dogs do when they have a recall problem. The dog will come to, I don't know, within arm's reach of the owner and then dance about on the periphery, because they know that as soon as you step forward, A, you're bending again, and B, you're grabbing at them. So if you start grabbing at them, they're going to avoid your hand. And that's a real shame. It's not a nice relationship to have with your dog. What you really want is the dog to think, oh, you're doing that thing with your hand. That means I might get my toy, or that means I might get my treat, or, I might get a game, or you might throw my ball, or, 101 other things. Do it. Go from day one, hand feed them their dinner like it. Put your hand with food in one hand, the other hand ready to take the collar. Both go in at the same time. Deliver the food, take the collar, let go. Deliver the food, take the collar, let go. If your dog started to snap at you already, then obviously you need a professional to help you with that. So don't just go ahead and do it on my advice here. This is more to do with dogs that, probably don't have a problem, maybe have a bit of a recall issue, but watch the signs. Watch the signs. If your dog starts to duck its head or twist away, or even come back and try and grab your hand, like a puppy will do this, grab your hand sort of round about the wrist height, they're not comfortable with you doing that. You will help yourself so much. Okay, so next one. When you're walking your dog, keep your elbows close to your body and keep your hands as central as you can if you have a dog that's reasonably strong. If you have a dog that's reasonably strong, it doesn't have to be a big dog. It can be a small dog. Once they dig their feet in, they can be quite powerful. If your arms are loose from your body, what happens is they go first, and then it's your shoulders, and then it's your back that goes next. So you'll sympathise if you've got a bad back. You know that, it's kind of, they'll end up pulling the top half of your body over because our centre of gravity is much higher. So when you're walking your dog and you just got your normal lead, keep your elbows tucked in and hold them close to your body. Keep your hands relatively central. You don't have to, but it just helps you control the lead. Then you can slide one hand down the lead if you need to move the dog from side to side. Why do I say that? Because then if the dog suddenly leaps forward, it's going to be your legs, your hips, everything else that holds the tension rather than just your arms. It's so difficult to describe. I must video it, but it makes a huge difference when you're trying to train your dog or even just walk it along, because your arms are not, your arms, your back, your shoulders are not the ones taking the strain.
This explains why I was recently diagnosed with tendinitis in my left arm. I hear what you're saying, Karen, but when you're walking 3 basset hounds or 4 basset hounds at once, I cannot walk with my arm next to my side. I end up having, I'm showing you on the video here, Karen, but I end up having to walk like this with the leads.
With your hand held up high in the air?
Yeah.
Why do you do that? Why don't you shorten the leads up so that it's lower?
Because they will not come close to my... 3 of them, if they're close to my leg, they're so low down, I can't see them. I'm 6'3", there I am walking along. Yeah. I can't see them. And, I will go flying.
Now, that to me, I would think, right, handle a challenge. And when I come over to Norway, I will show you how to do that. Sweden, sorry, yes. I will show you how not to do that. I think... if you end up holding your hand in the air, my goodness, that's like trying to lift the dogs as well. I'm very, very conscious of the centre of gravity. The dog's got a low centre of gravity. You've got a much higher centre of gravity. So ideally, you want those leads to be as low down your body as possible, so that if the dogs dive out sideways, they're not pulling you over. They're pulling you sideways if necessary. If they do, let's hope they don't. But some, they always go and sniff something. So elbows in, hands as low as possible, and close to your body, and keep them there. And then the only thing that gets pulled is, your strength, the strength of your lower body. It's so difficult to describe, but it really does make a huge difference. I will try. And use your legs to drive the motion rather than your arms. So if you're steering the dog, your legs steer the dog. And that's really hard to describe. So I will do a video on it.
Okay.
But it just makes anyone who's done my lead walking technique will know exactly what I mean. And they're probably sitting there going, nod, nod, nod. If you use your arms, the dog cannot see what you're doing because the arms are above the dog's head. Whereas if you move your feet, they can see what's going on and they will start to follow your movement.
Karen.
So let's leave that one there until I've got the video sorted out, shall we?
I think so. Karen, why don't you give us 2 more tips and then we'll save the rest for next time?
Yeah, no, that's fine. Help yourself by using strength equipment on a strong or a fast dog. Don't take an old-fashioned kind of macho attitude. I can handle this. I'm strong enough. I'm stronger than the dog. There are so many really, really good gadgets on the market now. And I say gadgets that actually they're not. There's 1 or 2 that I use regularly that are brilliant. They're not expensive, and they take the power of the dog away without hurting it without sort of yanking it around or doing anything overly nasty. If you try and kind of have a battle of strength with your dog, you could injure yourself, like we've just said, or you could injure the dog as well. So don't be afraid to use these bits of equipment. Yes, you may have to train the dog to wear some of them, but some of them are very easy to go on. There's harnesses you can get, you pop it over the dog's head, and almost immediately, because of the way that the physics and the body physiology works, the dog can't drag you about anymore. They're not strong anymore. And at that point, you can start to train the dog. So that would be my, don't be embarrassed about it. That's what you want. Do it. Go ahead and do it. If you need to know about bits of equipment, give me a shout because I can recommend various ones.
Or if you have any, I'm going to say, Karen, or if you have any tips about great equipment that works for you, do let us know.
Yeah, I mean, one of my clients actually came up with a really good bit of equipment, Georgina, that she started to use, and it works brilliantly for her because of what she's trying to achieve with the dog. And she I'd not seen it before. So yeah, anyone who's got anything like that, please let me know because I like to try these things out. So my last tip, a dog walk is not a distance. It's an experience. Don't think, I've got to walk up to the field and then I've got to go around the field and then I've got to go back. And how am I going to fit training in? Or the dog's going to drag me until this. Or it's not about the distance. It's about the experience. So if at the moment you've got a problem with your dog pulling on a lead, which you're planning to work on, but you can't bear to go that distance because the dog's going to drag you, okay, put the dog in the car, take them to the edge of the field, have your nice walk, pop them back in the car, come back. It's the experience for the dog. Just because you normally go around the block, but today you decide to train the dog and walk up and down the street, well, it's not the distance, it's the experience. And if the dog's getting trained, the dog will be tired. So please enjoy it. Don't put so much pressure on yourselves, guys. There's no such thing as perfection, and I know that. I think I'm a pretty good example of non-perfect. So, a dog walk, it's not a distance, it's an experience. Enjoy the experience. Don't put pressure on yourself to be perfect. Nobody is perfect, really not. So, have fun with it.
Yeah, I think that's something important that we have to remember, that, none of us is perfect. And these are things that we aspire to. And if you've got
absolutely. Yeah. Aspiring is good.
Exactly. And there's some great tips there. And, maybe we can return to some more handling tips next week. I think you've got a few more things to say on that. Well, Karen, before we go, I think, I'd just like to say thank you very much to everyone that's listening. Remember, if you have any tips or anything that you'd like to share about what we've talked about today, you can get in touch with us by sending an email to podcast@karenwild.co.uk, or you can send Karen a tweet on Twitter. That's twitter.com/wildpaw. And remember, if you're looking to put together your own personalized, tailor-made training program, just go into Karen's website and you can see all the resources that you can put together at a very, very low cost. Karen, what's the address for your website?
It's www.intellidogs.com. So Intellidogs is spelled INTELLIDOGS, as in intelligent, but with dogs on the end. So let's hope everyone can spell it from that. I just think, the blog's also on there. Some of you might have accessed the podcast from the blog on there. Have a little look around, and there's quite a few bits of advice, free advice on there as well. That go through it, have a little look. Any comments you want to make, we always read your comments. So please just, let us know how you feel about things. And if there's something we've missed in the podcast you want us to talk about, let us know.
All right then. Well, From here in Sweden, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me here in my little blowy village in Baston.